This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where, well, these are the mornings I dread the most. Well, that's not true. I don't know what the mornings I dread the most are, but at least we can get our teeth into this tale. I suppose the mornings I dread the most would be the mornings where there is no news. What the hell are we going to talk about? Parking tickets? I don't know. But I haven't had one of those for a very long time. You still get slow news days, and you still get days when the news is packed with stories and events that don't actually lend themselves particularly well to the time that we spend together every morning, time that I cherish and value more with each passing year, to be honest with you. But the kind of reason why I dread the story we're going to discuss first this morning is because it speaks to a much deeper malaise, doesn't it? I'm pretty close to saying, how do we deal with a story like this in a world where it doesn't matter? Oh boy, there goes the shiver. How do we deal with a story like this in a world where it doesn't matter? And of course, in brackets, it should matter so much. It just should. Now, one colleague of mine, off-air, is touchingly, I would say, perhaps even naively optimistic that this really matters, that this will matter at least a bit. Between you and me, they've just had some time off, so I think they've come back a little bit detoxified, detarnished by the cynicism of covering this stuff every day. But the idea that senior members, up to and including the actual vice president, could be discussing incredibly sensitive military material on an app, on a chat app, is bad enough. The fact that they accidentally included a prominent journalist in the conversation is, I mean, I would like to say beyond belief. One journalist describes it thus: there are few US presidential actions more sensitive, more fraught with peril than when and where to use American military force. If such information were obtained by American adversaries in advance, it could put lives and national foreign policy objectives at risk. As far as we know, this group chat with information about an impending US strike in Yemen. I want to make that clear. It was impending. It hadn't happened yet. As far as we know, it did not fall into the wrong hands, and we can be fairly confident of that because the targets didn't seem to have any idea what was incoming. It doesn't mean that other enemies of our interests, a category into which we increasingly have to consider inserting the United States of America. But we don't know what other enemies of the United States' interests might have had or managed to get their hands on the encrypted conversation. Unfortunately for the Trump administration, Jeffrey Goldberg, an influential political journalist and editor-in-chief of the Atlantic magazine, was accidentally included in the chat by the White House National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz. I mean, where do you start? Where do you start? With the job description, I think. What's your job there, Mike? I'm National Security Advisor. What did you do? I kind of accidentally included a journalist in the most sensitive conversation that I've had this year so far. You did what, mate? And the job description? National Security Advisor. I mean, do you see what I mean? How do you do this in a world where it doesn't matter? I said to Eleanor earlier that Donald Trump will come out and attack the Atlantic magazine. And she said to me, he already has. How do you do this in a world where it doesn't matter? Let's consider for a moment not just the content, but also the tone of these exchanges. They sound like, can I say this in a post-adolescence world? We may talk about adolescence later in the program, but they sound like incels talking about girls in the sixth form. The kind of really sort of second-rate blokish banter of the style is, I mean, almost beyond belief. And the insults to their closest allies, the huge insult to Europe. J.D. Vance coming perilously close to sounding as if he regrets the fact that we defeated the Nazis together in the 1940s. describing that extraordinary act of international solidarity as an exercise in bailing out, something that he doesn't want to do again or that he actually regrets. That's the point, isn't it? That's the point. How do you do this in a world where it won't matter, where Donald Trump, more than the people around him, more than the people caught up in this scandal, has created an ecosystem in which nothing matters? Nothing matters. There will be more people, and correct me if I'm wrong in the usual way, 0345 6060973, there will be more people in America concerned about a lie involving Haitians eating cats and dogs. They're eating the pets. There will be more people excited by that lie than there will be by what must be the most egregious national security breach that you can think of from the very top of your head. Even the occasional Republican has finally found their testicles, with Don Bacon, a congressman from Nebraska, saying that the action was unconscionable. None of this should have been sent on non-secure systems. Russia and China are surely monitoring his unclassified phone. Speaker of the House of Commons, Mike Johnson, characteristically tried to downplay one of the worst imaginable transgressions of normality undertaken by his colleagues, saying they'll tighten up and make sure it doesn't happen again. I don't know what else you can say about that. What else can you say about that? 0345 6060973. What else can you say about that? Well, I think we should tell him. I think we should tell the Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, what else we can say about that, what else we can say about the fact that the most senior members of Donald Trump's administration appear to hold the whole of Europe in contempt. There's a debate about policy. There's a discussion about operational details, about the impending US military strike. And there is, if you want to be journalistic about it, an extraordinary, unique indeed, insight into how Trump's senior national security team works. Amazing job, Waltz wrote to the group just minutes after the strikes on the Houthi targets in Yemen took place on Saturday, the 15th of March. And then, I don't know. Maybe it's my age. And then some emojis. A fist, no less. A flag, inevitably. And a fire. As if the stupidest person you can find on social media was posting about an event of international importance, but happens to be the National Security Advisor. The emojis, well, we shall see what comes of that. But the content of the conversation, there's three things going on here. The content of the conversation, the context of the conversation, and the error, the question of competence, the competence of the conversation. I mean, I don't know. I'm presuming in this introduction that you've seen all of it, but I'll probably share some more details with you shortly. I mean, the most important is, I'm not sure the president is aware how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now. There's a further risk that we see moderate to severe spike in oil prices, talking about how Yemen poses a larger threat to European shipping, which is true. But the vice president then went on to say that he'd support what the team decided and keep these concerns to myself. He talks about having had enough of bailing out Europe. The language is, I mean, it's unbelievable. But you can tell that I'm challenged this morning by the question of what we can do about it together. I mean, look, in the great scheme of things, we can't do anything about it together, can we? But how does the world process such an extraordinary departure from everything that is normal and important? How does the world deal with, how do we even talk about, how do we resist the urge? Here's the question. How do we resist the urge to roll our eyes and look away and talk about something else? Oh yeah, here we go. Something absolutely heinous has happened. And Donald Trump has created an ecosystem in which all of his closest allies are going to pretend that it's no big deal at all. The media is going to discuss it in an attempt to be even-handed. So on the other hand, there it is. I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic, says J.D. Vance. In capital letters. I mean, this is the bit I can't get past, and I worry that I'm being a bit trivial. It looks like Twitter posts from people who've got US flags as their avatars and MAGA in their job description, MAGA in their biographies. It's pathetic, European freeloading. An enormous insight. How many people have served? How many British personnel did we lose in Iraq or in Afghanistan? Essentially helping the United States of America to, quotes, police the world, end quotes. It's an insult to every family of a dead British soldier. An incredible insult. I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic. And then, I know, they go on to seek to justify it. What I want to know from you, well, I don't know really, because on one level, I'm kind of tempted to ask you how big a deal this is, but I don't want to do that because that opens the possibility that it isn't. It's a bit like saying, how high is Mount Everest? And someone rings in and says, well, it's not actually that high, James. There are some mountains on the moon that are higher. Don't at me. I know there aren't. How does it started with Brexit, right? And I'm not going to give you the story again about the time I had to ask Andrea Leadsom what she thought about the World Trade Organization after being told everything about the World Trade Organization by the former Director General of the World Trade Organization. But this idea that the news has to be balanced, that the news has to be even-handed, that the news has, for every yin there is a yang. This is just, this is unconscionably awful. This is it's a question of competence, it's a question of corruption, moral corruption. But those of us who have been calling every step on this hideous path to democratic decline, those of us who have, and this isn't a boast, quite the opposite, in fact, those of us who have been proved right about absolutely everything involving Donald Trump since well before the January the 6th debacle, don't know how to deal with these moments. And there aren't many of us in the business. There's plenty of you out there, but there aren't many of us in the business who don't know how to deal with these moments. I know, that you don't do it in an even-handed way. You don't do, well, but does he have a point? You definitely don't do that. So what do you do? Do I just sit here and rage into the microphone until it's sopping wet with spittle? What do I do? No, I won't, Keith. Don't worry, mate. I know that's your department. What do you do? How do you deal with a problem like this? How do you treat it in a way that is appropriate, that is normal? What's worse? That the act of incompetence or the content of the conversation? 0345 60 60973. So that's how you do it. You don't open the door to any dispute regarding the level of the awfulness. You have a conversation about what is most awful, what is more awful. The epic levels of incompetence on display that would involve, it would have been bad enough conducting the conversation on their phones like this, but to then accidentally include a journalist when your job description says National Security Advisor, and none of these other clowns had the wit to notice that the person who was popping up in their contacts wasn't the person that was supposed to be party to the conversation. So why is everyone telling me to talk about solar panels? Is this a joke? Is this some joke I don't understand? Have people been talking about solar panels in preference to the real-time decline and demise of American democracy? Surely not. But not only the incompetence of accidentally of conducting the conversation in such a stupid way on such a stupid platform, but to accidentally include an actual journalist. And I think the best illustration of how this is part of a much bigger problem, which will be the other part of our conversation. So what's worse, the act of incompetence or the contents of the conversation? Or are they equal? 0345 60 60973. Hit those numbers now. You will get through. But if I had to prove to you beyond any reasonable doubt that Donald Trump has created an environment in which, on one level, none of this matters, it would be the fact that he claimed to know nothing about it. He has reached the point now, way, way, way beyond where he was during his first term, where he can tell you on live national television that up is down, that black is white, that freedom is slavery, and that ignorance is strength. He just can. He did it with the comments about Volodymyr Zelensky being a dictator, didn't he? And then when he was asked about it in the Oval Office, his response was, I can't believe I said that. And no one knows how to deal with it. It's different in the Oval Office because there's protocol in place. But no one knows how to deal with it. What do? Well, you called Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator. And he goes, I can't believe I said that. That doesn't sound like something I would say. And they don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. If I'd been there, what would I have done? Yes, you did. I mean, you just keep shouting, yes, you did. You called him a dictator until they drag you out of the room kicking and screaming, which we're pretty close to and which, of course, they're already doing in Turkey, ruled by a man that Trump admires. What do you do in a moment like this? Because as soon as he's asked about it, as soon as reporters got to see the rabbit, got a chance to ask him again in the Oval Office, do you know what he said? He knew nothing about it, and then he attacked the Atlantic. So his most senior colleagues, the most senior members of his administration, have committed an act of incompetence so egregious that it's almost impossible to believe. They have insulted their allies. They have provided gift-wrapped PR coups for Russia and China and all of the enemies of civilization on this planet. And what does their boss do when he's asked about it? He pretends he doesn't know. It is as if Shaggy has become president in his full "it wasn't me" mode. He pretends he doesn't know. And that's why I do think that I find this interesting. And I worry sometimes that the stuff I find interesting isn't the stuff that you will find interesting, because you don't have to get up at 10 o'clock when the light comes on and start talking about this stuff in a way that is hopefully original, interesting and important. But the stuff I find interesting is how the hell you do it some days when it is so completely at odds with everything that has gone before. We've had preparation for this. We've had dress rehearsals galore. Brexit was an early indication of how completely broken the truth could be by a corrupt media, or rather by a political class so completely detached from the truth that even decent members of the media didn't know how to report it. Thank you very much, Pascal Lamy. Now we turn to Andrea Leadsom. How do you do it? How do you do it? Imagine if, I don't know where you work. I know I have to stop talking. Sometimes it takes me a while to get warmed up. I don't know where I'm going to go with a conversation that feels to me to be of such enormous importance that I don't know how to convey that to you. But I promise I'm nearly done. I don't know where you work. Imagine if the second in command, the third in command, the fourth in command and the fifth in command were having a private conversation about colleagues that was incredibly rude, were discussing hugely market-sensitive and desperately important information in a completely insecure way, and were insulting people that they work with and call upon for help and support on a daily basis. And they accidentally sent it to your main rival. They accidentally sent it to me. Or they accidentally sent it to the editor of the Financial Times or the editor of the Daily Mail. Imagine if it happened in your place of work, right? And then the very next day, your boss, the capo de capi, the chief executive, the person in charge of the whole flipping coconut shy, says, I don't know anything about this. What would that tell you about the state of the business that you worked in? The state of the company that you were supporting with your work, with your toil, with your blood, sweat and tears? And in the case of the military, of course, it is blood. And the boss comes in the next day and says, I don't know about this. Anyway, isn't the Atlantic awful? The magazine that has reported, oh man, there it is. Who does Donald Trump turn his attack dogs on? The journalist who was accidentally included in the conversation. And to think that people used to have a swing at me for using the F word in the context of Donald Trump's rapid decline into fascistic conduct. Who are you going to attack when your senior colleagues mess up on an unprecedented scale? Well, I'm going to attack the journalist that reported it after being accidentally included in their conversation. It's 10:23, sorry.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:25. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And how do you do it? How do you deal with a complete... It's the toolbox. How do you deal with something that is beyond normality, using the tools provided by normality? I don't know. I bet you don't either, but I hope you'll have a crack at answering it. 0345 606 0973 is the number you need. Susan's in Twickenham. What's going on, Susan?
Oh, hello, James. Thank you for taking my call. I've talked to you before, but my God, I'm nervous this morning because I'm just furious. I'm absolutely furious.
Well, however badly it goes, it wouldn't be as bad as what the National Security Advisor for the whole of the United States of America has just been up to.
Yeah, that is true. Right, where do I begin? Competency.
Yes.
I mean, I think we know that these people are incompetent. They're cowboys. They are absolute cowboys. And I would include Donald Trump in that.
Yes.
Absolutely. They are absolute monsters. I don't think... If they were given a map of the world, I don't think they would know where Ukraine was.
No, that's very true.
Quite frank. But I think this revelation is actually quite interesting, and I think it's very useful for us in Europe because it tells quite clearly that the conversations that are probably going on in the background with the Russians,
yes,
is of this order, that they're using the schoolboy playground, awful rubbish language. And if they are talking about us in Europe in this particular way to the Russians, then we're going to have to start excluding certain people from conversations. I think high security stuff, anything, absolutely anything that would involve a high security conversation. People like Waltz, J.D. Vance, they're just not allowed in the room. The conversation.
I don't know if this is feasible, though.
It must be feasible. We can invite them. They can be there. We can say we're discussing X, Y, and Z. But then it comes to a point in a conversation or in a meeting where you say, "Thank you very much. We're going to bring all that to the end. We're going to have some photographs now, and we will now." But Five Eyes. I'm
a bit out of my comfort zone here. But Five Eyes involves full cooperation, doesn't it, between five countries on shared, well, not full but it involves shared intelligence.
It's supposed to.
Yeah.
It is supposed to, and you see that. I'd forgotten about that, and thank you for bringing that up because it's desperately important. But to what extent is Five Eyes now being of any use to us, and how much do we take from it and use? I just think this is a warning to us, a huge warning.
And how about the other bit, which is a little bit self-indulgent? Well, I don't think it is self-indulgent because we're all in this together, to coin a slightly old-fashioned phrase. How do we discuss? I mean, you're doing a great job. And you're conveying the severity of the situation. But I will turn my radio on or my television at some point, and I'll hear somebody two sidesing it. I'll hear somebody saying, "But is there people who obviously got no idea what the Marshall Plan is, for example, whose historical ignorance is off the flipping charts, but they can rise to extraordinary positions in the UK media and politics, as we know. How do we live? How do we recalibrate for a world in which Five Eyes is possibly dead, a world in which the most senior members of the US administration conduct conversations that make them sound like frat boys discussing who's going to buy a keg of beer?
God, I think we've very quietly got to get on with our own business, and we've got to form. Well, I don't know what it means. I wouldn't know where to start because I'm not technical. But people like Lammy know what it means, and what we've got to do is start building our own security system that excludes the Americans. Yeah. And if and when the Trump era finishes and he hopefully does not change the Constitution in America, which I suspect he may well try and do, there will perhaps come a period of normality when we can perhaps invite them to join our security system. But I think we've got to build our own platforms now.
And that is close to a silver lining, I suppose. I mean, it means a resurgent Germany. Imagine if that had been on the table during all the ludicrous debates about European armies and Brexit. Germany rearming and America no longer an ally. And these are the nails in the coffin of any confidence that analysis is wrong. They just are. Some nails are bigger than others. Thank you, Susan. A perfect start. 10:30 is the time. 0345 60 60973 is the number you need. I fully share your loathing of bailing Europe out. I just hate bailing Europe out again, writes the Vice President of the United States of America. Referring, I wonder, to what? The Second World War? Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is... I don't know. It's not the question for now. But if it was you, would you have coughed, or would you have just stayed there until they realised their mistake? Because the journalist responsible at The Atlantic displays more integrity in the following paragraph than every single member of Trump's administration has displayed since the day he was first elected president. At 11:44 a.m., the account labelled Pete Hegseth posted in Signal a, quote, team update, end quotes. I will not quote from this update or from certain other subsequent texts, writes Jeffrey Goldberg. The information contained in them, if they had been read by an adversary of the United States, could conceivably have been used to harm American military and intelligence personnel, particularly in the broader Middle East, Central Command's area of responsibility. What I will say, in order to illustrate the shocking recklessness of this Signal conversation, is that the Hegseth post contained operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen, including information about targets, weapons the US would be deploying, and attack sequencing. Hegseth, until relatively recently, was a commentator on Fox News, now Secretary of State for Defense. So I really don't want to do this to you. But if you've been kind enough to listen to the first half an hour of this programme, up to and including our first call, I wonder if you want to have a go at guessing how Pete Hegseth would answer questions about this. So you have the political editor of The Atlantic deciding to do the decent thing, Jeffrey Goldberg, deciding to do the patriotic and honourable thing, to not share the full details of what the Defence Secretary had posted, okay, and making it clear that that is what he has done, stating in terms that he won't post these texts because they could have been used to harm American military and intelligence personnel. George Clooney's given a brilliant speech recently about the importance of the fourth estate stepping in when the other three estates fail. Donald Trump has attacked George Clooney. So what would Pete Hegseth, if I'm right, and everything is broken, and Donald Trump's administration is now in a new space beyond corrupt, how would Pete Hegseth respond to questions about this episode, particularly with reference to Jeffrey Goldberg's explanation of why he has not shared the messages Hegseth posted that could conceivably be used to harm American military and intelligence personnel? Just think about it for a minute. I'm not going to overplay it. If I'm right, how would Hegseth, as a Trump protege, as a man weaned on the corrupt milk of Donald Trump's political posturing, how would he respond if everything has curdled, if everything has been corrupted, if up is down, if black is white, if freedom is slavery, if ignorance is strength? How would Pete Hegseth respond to questions about this egregious episode if, as I'm trying to explain to you this morning, we are in territory unimaginably awful? Have a little guess.
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage. This is what he does. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that.
Right,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey, I appreciate it. You see, the journalists don't know what to do. What does Jeffrey Goldberg do now? Does he sue him for libel? Does he reveal the details that he worries might? How do you prove that man wrong without compromising the safety of the American personnel whose safety he compromised? I'm going to play it to you again, and then I'll get back to the phones, I promise. But I bet you got that right. In fact, let's have a look at the text. Let's see how predictable it was. Okay? Well, Michael's brain's gone to where my brain went listening to that. Isn't what he just said libelous? He'll double down, says Craig, and attack the journalist and his publication. If he threw an axe, he'd hit the wrong target. They'll play the victim, James. Whether it's the lie of carrying Canada or bailing Europe out, they always cast themselves as the victim in order to justify abusing their allies. It responded to the audience of one. He responded like his audience of one wanted him to. Deny, 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 there's nothing to see here. Attacking the journalist who has done the decent thing. And, I mean, listen to the language. Listen, would you let this man, I don't know, would you trust this man with anything, let alone the security of the free world?
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage. This is what he does. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let's get back to the phones. Mernal is in Birmingham. Mernal, what would you like to say?
I totally agree. That journalist should go ahead, well, not him, his publication should go ahead and sue. They should sue the American government.
Doesn't matter.
And Peter Hegseth.
Doesn't matter.
And why doesn't it matter?
Because Donald Trump is a multiple felon. You know, it doesn't matter when they're found guilty by the courts. The courts become corrupt. This is how fascism works. You call a journalist corrupt, he sues you, the court agrees, you go after the court. He's already going after judges. I don't mean to sound bleak and depressed, but I don't think it would work.
Well, I think it would work.
Okay.
And also what should happen is our government, I voted for Keir Starmer because I wanted change.
Yes.
And instead, he is sucking up to the man. I wouldn't suck up. We're not going to get a deal. We're not going to get any trade deal. And we should go more towards the East, so more towards Europe. And we should stick with our friends because they are no longer...
He's trying to have both, isn't he? He's trying to have his cake and eat it. I mean, I don't know.
Well, that's not going to work.
No, but that's equally, I don't know if you provoke him deliberate. I think Starmer knows he's doomed to fail, but is doing what he thinks he has to do at this point in time. I think
what Macron is doing and what Mr. Carney is doing is far better.
Yes.
Because it shows strength, not weakness. And Trump, the midterms are coming, and you wait and see. The Republicans are going to lose quite a few seats.
As if you have free and fair elections, Manol.
Well, I think they're going. Well, he can't change anything. Look what happened in 2020.
Well, he came perilously close to overthrowing the entire democratic system of the United States of America, and yet people on both sides of the Atlantic were still queuing up to pat him on the back and give him a biscuit.
Yeah, I wish we had done more like David Lammy said before they became into government.
But you highlight the problem with your own position there, because you can say things in opposition that you can't say in power.
No,
we've got...
But we need to stand up to him.
But we've got American personnel on the ground in this country. We've got United States air bases. We've got, technology.
Kick them out.
Send them home.
I think we need to, because who helped? When did they help us last? The Second World War, they haven't helped us. We helped them after 9/11, and he's forgotten all that.
It is a remarkable intervention from J.D. Vance. I don't know if he is referring specifically to the Suez Canal, but when he talks about bailing Europe out again, it creates a very ugly image of an America First movement, which was very popular in 1930s America, largely very, very fascist adjacent and deeply, profoundly opposed to American involvement in the Second World War. And, many historians will wonder whether, absent Pearl Harbor, whether or not the Americans ever would have got properly stuck in. I don't know how popular a view that is among normal citizens of the United States, but it's probably a category error to talk about normal citizens of the United States because it's such a disparate and enormous country. I envy you, Murnal. I envy your clarity of thought. I don't know if it's even fair to say I think you're being a bit simplistic. We can't just send all the US airmen in East Anglia home, or Mildenhall and all the other places. What do we do with Trident? You know, I don't know. But how bad does it have to get before Keir Starmer recognises that normal service has not just been suspended? Normal service it's becoming a redundant concept, a meaningless phrase. We are so far away from normal service that nobody knows what to do, except possibly, as Murnal rather brilliantly reminds us, except possibly Mark Carney, who, I don't know if you've ever seen a graph. The last time I saw a graph as steep as the Canadian Liberal Party's rise, it was a graph tracking Liz Truss's popularity heading in the opposite direction. The last time in Western politics I saw a graph that steep on electoral or personal rating calculus, it was Liz Truss. But, I mean, happily for Mark Carney, he's moving in exactly the opposite direction. So how do we do it? How do we do it? You tell me. 0345 6060 973. It reaches the point where you wonder, if you turn on your radio and hear somebody treating this story as if it's not among the most important stories of our time, whether you, I don't know, stage some sort of intervention.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is not the most important element of this story, but my 53-year-old heart breaks at the deployment of emojis in a conversation like this. I don't know if I want you to ring in about this. I just need to get it off my chest. I mean, you're talking about people responding to a US attack upon Houthi positions in Yemen, and they're using emojis of fires and flags. When Hegseth posted that shockingly reckless content that involved potentially jeopardizing the safety of American military and intelligence personnel, only one person replied directly to that update that Hegseth denies. There's a question for the philosophers. How can you reply to a post that never happened? And that person was J.D. Vance, who wrote, "I will say a prayer for victory." This is after the Secretary of State for Defense shared details of exactly what the American military was going to do on a chat in which a journalist had been accidentally included. So the Vice President wrote, "I will say a prayer for victory." And I don't know why, in many ways, I find the next line, which is in parentheses in the Atlantic magazine's copy, in Jeffrey Goldberg's copy, in many ways I find this the most upsetting. What's the word I want? It's not upsetting. Richard's clever. He suggests emojis are news speak. They're a way, perhaps, of bypassing the actual intellectual heft and content of a contribution and reducing it instead to, I don't know, infantile posturing, ludicrous, dummy spitting simplicity. So here's the line. The only person to reply to the update from Hegseth was the person identified as the Vice President. "I will say a prayer for victory," Vance wrote. Brackets. Two other users subsequently added prayer emoji. Close brackets. I'm not wrong, am I? That's just... Good Lord, I nearly swore then. That's just chuffing ridiculous. Prayer emoji. Anyway, on we go. How do we deal with this? How on earth do we deal with this? Answer, I don't know. Anthony's in Bletchley Park. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Can I come out from underneath the table where I'm hiding at the moment,
It
please?
is that bad. Let's be absolutely clear about this. And the problem is that it's part of a process, isn't it? It's the latest bad thing to happen since the last bad thing, but this is a bad thing of an entirely different order. This is sort of January the 6th bad, albeit in an entirely different way.
Yeah. There are three big issues I'd like to pick up on. Just first one, which is associated to it. You can't accidentally add anybody as a signal. I use it. You've actually got to. It's an act of commission. You have to add a user.
They thought he was someone else and didn't have the wit to establish that with beyond reasonable doubt, and then they stuck him on it, but with someone with the same initials apparently.
Okay. But I mean, I'd be interested to know if The Atlantic is such an awful publication in the eyes of the Trump regime, why they had that phone number in the first place.
I didn't. That's fake news, would he'd say. He is a proven and corrupt journalist. There was no conversation. That's tomorrow's news. There was no conversation. He's invented it. It's entirely invented. He's made the whole thing up. He's fake news.
Okay, so the 3 points that I want to pick up on is, firstly, hypocrisy. Is the Republicans were all over Hillary Clinton like a bad suit for using insecure email, and they made it one of their attack. They made it one of their attack vectors when they were trying to discredit her in the 2016 election. So it's utter hypocrisy. Second thing, there's willful ignorance involved here. You're not allowed to conduct classified conversations in the US using Signal. It's a breach of federal law. I'm pretty sure it's the Espionage Act. Now, they must have known that. And if they didn't know that, what does that tell us about their competence? And also, the reason they're not allowed to use things like Signal or WhatsApp, God help us, is because under federal law, they are required to keep records of all communications. And of course, Signal has a disappearing message facility, and therefore you have to ask, why is it they're going to conduct strategic issues over Signal with a facility where all their discussions and debates can be deleted? And interestingly, going back to Hegseth denial, National Security Council spokesman, a chap called Brian Hughes, he actually contradicted Hegseth and turned around. He said, at the time the message thread was reported, I'm quoting here from The Atlantic, from Politico. At this time, the message thread that was reported appears to be authentic. We're reviewing how an inadvertent number was added to the chain. So you've got the National Security Council saying, sorry, the Secretary of State for Defence is probably telling a porcupine.
Well, he hasn't denied that the breach happened. He's denied the thing that Jeffrey Goldberg felt he couldn't actually share in detail because it would compromise. I mean, that is one of the most disgusting acts of treachery that you can imagine, because he's looked at the details like a weasel in a sack and he's thought, oh, good, the journalist hasn't actually posted what I said, so I can deny that I said it. Because the journalist has done the decent thing, I can be even more indecent.
Absolutely. If I go to my third point, which is geostrategic ignorance, Vance's comments on trade through the Red Sea just show the level of utter, ignorance these people have. Because he turned around and said, it's only going to impact on 3% of the US trade, and why are we bailing out the Americans? And Hegseth said, pathetic. The impact on US trade is far more serious because US deliveries to markets in Asia and the Middle East, they account for about 50% of the total eastward transit flows via the Suez Canal and through the Red Sea. So actually the impact on US mercantile shipping is vastly more significant than it is to the Europeans. And so what he said was simply utterly wrong.
Well, I have to take your word for that. But if they've said the wrong stuff on Fox News, it's not beyond... I mean, it's entirely credible that they would just repeat whatever, propaganda line they'd heard most recently.
Absolutely. Well, I'm more than happy to share with the producer the data source after.
No, I don't doubt you. Of course I don't. You've been of enormous help over the years in discussing matters like this. The question then becomes whether or not enough damage has already been done, and suddenly the relevance of the conversation about the speed with which Trump's people have acted becomes absolutely pertinent, absolutely clear, because we could be in a position where the Department of Justice and the FBI don't even investigate this because he's already got he's either got them on the run, got them frit, or got his people in charge.
Yeah, there's a couple of other points, if I might. This just shows it's another stick that Vance is using, any stick available with which to beat the Europeans. And it's another clanging example, if one was needed, of the US pivot from what I'm describing as traditional allies to historic enemies, because there's no other way of reading it. They're turning around and saying, bloody European, beg your pardon,
that's all right.
Flipping Europeans, we've got to bail them out again.
Is that a common trope in American politics? I mean, has there been a quiet caucus of people who feel this way, or is it a new phenomenon? Do we know?
I think they're called the government, aren't they?
No, don't be glib. You know what I mean. Is Vance voicing something that's been bubbling under the surface for a long time, because the alternative is that he's just saying whatever the Kremlin wants to hear?
I think, I mean, not being glib, I think the answer to that
I told you off. I sounded like a school teacher then. My apologies.
I'm sorry for being glib.
Don't be glib. 100 times. I will not be glib on James O'Brien's programme.
I won't be glib. Well, don't beat me. I didn't go ample force. What you could do, I think probably it would be improper for me to make any comment about what Americans think about it. Therefore, we'd need an American listener to call in on that. But all this links into my inescapable conclusion that the current US regime is characterized by utter, dangerous, strategic incompetence. There is no other reading for it. And everything that we do, every international relationship that was previously predicated on having Pax Americana to backstop what we are trying to do, I think has been fundamentally undermined. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we should all go back under the table where I'm cowering. But what it does mean is that it's a very good wake-up call for Europe to say, you know what, we can no longer depend on the US as a reliable ally. We are simply going to have to go it alone. And the Ukrainians obviously have picked up on this. Yes. And I talked a lot to some very smart people in Ukraine. And they are significantly more, I wouldn't say relaxed, but they are significantly more cynical about the Americans than the Americans would say that Ukraine's position is. Because the world's biggest producer of drones at the moment, attack drones, is Ukraine.
Ukraine, yes.
And Ukraine knows that the war is going to be largely won and fought on the battlefield by the ability to deploy both UAVs and UCAVs, which are surveillance drones, and what's called first-person vision drones, which means you can attack something and to take out a tank with a $350 drone. Wow. So the Ukrainians are much more, I hesitate to use the word relaxed, but they are far more objective about the relationship. Sanguine, yeah, because they also pointed out that everybody turns around and says, oh, God's sake, if the Americans turn off the arms tap, this is going to be the end of the world. No, the Americans turned it off for 6 months in 2024, and the Ukrainians managed. And when you look at what Germany has done, which is to take the lid off their debt restructuring ability, so they can now pump hundreds of billions of euros into their defence industry, the one thing that Russia is terrified of is German rearmament, and that's precisely what Ukraine has achieved in Europe. And so we get this position whereby you have a fundamentally, I think it's not unfair to say, corrupt and duplicitous regime in the White House, and it pains me to say that, having worked for years with the American military and the American intelligence community. You have a regime there which is, through the ripples and the shockwaves that are emanating out across the Atlantic to Europe, is going to force the Europeans to say, you know what, we are actually going to have to stand up and prove that we matter again. We count. We're important. And
that's a big silver lining. It's the most upbeat analysis that anyone will be able to provide or find. If I were to be glib for a moment, what you're describing is, from a Ukrainian point of view, hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Absolutely.
And they know that the worst is coming, because there's no earthly way that Donald Trump is going to abide by the United States historical commitments. Absolutely no way at all. And it's good to know that the capabilities that Ukraine will have, as has been clear since the very beginning of this invasion, this illegal invasion, the nimbleness, the resolution, the bravery, the courage of Ukraine, as embodied by Volodymyr Zelensky, who was so royally insulted in the Oval Office just a couple of weeks ago, has taken the Kremlin by surprise. And albeit that the Kremlin and the White House are now, by the Kremlin's own account, in absolute lockstep with each other, committed to the same interest, I'll say it again, by the Kremlin's own account, it doesn't change the nimbleness, if you like, that Anthony in Bletchley Park describes. A lot of people crediting once again the quality of the calls that come into this programme. David saying, great caller, this guy is fantastic. Amy saying that your callers are so amazing. It's almost like I could take the rest of the day off.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 11. I played you the audio, of course, but it is worth digging out the video of, it's probably on the LBC website, of the Secretary of State for Defence, Pete Hegseth, being questioned by journalists as he got off a plane. The man looks absolutely unhinged. He looks totally manic. But this is my hobby horse, isn't it? I'm obsessed with the word ecosystem. I've written a lot about the ecosystem in which really bad stuff could happen in this country. And that was an ecosystem created incrementally over years, sometimes not even deliberately, David Cameron becoming leader of the Conservative Party and becoming Prime Minister did not point to imminent disaster, but his personality defects and lack of rigour allowed him to make promises about a referendum in order to, he thought, cover his own backside, not caring enough about consequences, thinking he was lucky, treating it all like a game of cricket at Eton, opened the door to the monstrosity of Brexit. The ecosystem that the UK media had created by, among other things, treating Nigel Farage like an honest actor, allowed that to gather pace. So ecosystems fascinate me, but the ecosystem in which Britain could be broken, it's interesting, isn't it, how many people now use that as a throwaway phrase. When I wrote How They Broke Britain, it was supposed to be an exaggeration or hyperbole or evidence of Brexit derangement syndrome. Now people who've been shilling for the Tories for their entire careers talk about Britain being broken as a consequence of the last 14 years, albeit that they will very dishonestly try to pretend that it's somehow a Labour achievement. But the ecosystem in the States has been broken in 2 months. My thesis goes back to Rupert Murdoch buying The Sun, even before Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister. Or not long, I think before Thatcher became Prime Minister. So when I talk about the ecosystem in which we could become a country where something as unconscionably insane as Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister became possible, and then all of our newspapers queuing up to praise her fiscal event as the best thing since sliced eggs, as the best thing since sliced bread. That's mad, right? That an ecosystem could be created in a country where not only can Liz Truss become Prime Minister, introduce a fiscal event that is completely at odds with observable reality, not to mention fiscal gravity, but get praised to the rafters by everybody from the Daily Mail to the Daily Telegraph to Nigel Farage to the Daily Express, and then when it all falls apart within 20 minutes, none of them are touched by it. None of their careers are compromised. None of them have to fall on their swords or apologise. Andrew Neil now writing every day about how awful Trump is. When he was running The Spectator, it did more to promote Trump cheerleaders in the British public discourse than any other organ in history. It's incredible how scot-free they all are. But it took years. It took years to frighten the BBC into a position where if you were interviewing the former Director General of the World Trade Organization, you then had to interview Andrea Leadsom for the other side of the argument. It took years, it took decades for the think tanks on Tufton Street, the lobby groups that call themselves think tanks or educational charities, to have infected every layer of the UK media with their secretly funded propaganda that the commissioning editors and the producers who ring up these Herberts and clowns every day asking them to come on programmes have got no idea that they're complicit in a massive con job. It took decades to achieve that. Some of them have even been stupid enough to write about the process, to say the quiet part out loud. It took decades to turn this country into a place where Boris Johnson could be regarded as an honest broker, where Liz Truss could be regarded as an economic genius, where becoming the first population in history to actually vote to impose economic sanctions on ourselves and abolish our freedom of movement, our own freedom of movement. It took decades for us to become a country like that. In the space of 2 months, the United States has become a country where the most senior members of the administration can conduct an act of such egregious incompetence and political corruption that I almost don't have the words for it. And then their boss, the president, can look straight down the barrel of a camera and deny any knowledge whatsoever of an incident about which the entire world is talking.
Mr. President, your reaction to the story in The Atlantic that said that some of your top cabinet officials and aides had been discussing very sensitive material through Signal and included an Atlantic reporter for that. What is your response to that?
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. Not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it. You're saying that they had what?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and
having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
With the Houthis.
The Houthis? You mean the attack on the Houthis? Right. Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective. I can tell you that. I don't know anything about it. You're telling me about it for the first time.
What a liar. Oh, what an almighty, irredeemable, hideous liar. What an appalling act of... I mean, hey, if I was Donald Trump's PR, I'd take liar. Thank God they're calling him a liar. They're not pointing out how incompetent he would have to be to truly know nothing about this event. Liar is a win. That's how his little brain works. That's how it whirs. What's the least thing? What's the thing I can do now that insulates me most from the obvious disaster that I'm caught up in? How does my narcissistic self-obsession deal with this crisis? Okay. I can't say that. I can't defend it. I don't know anything about it. What? What's that you say? Who? What? Who? Where? What? Oh, and I'll shoot the messenger as well. Shoot the messenger. In fact, I'll shoot the messenger first. And then I will... It's how his brain is working. You can hear it, can't you? I'm not going to attack the journalist that's just asked the question because everybody in the room knows that this is all that everybody in the room is talking about. I can't attack the journalist that's asked the question. It's not like a question that is bringing me something new that I don't know about, and I can attack the journalist. I can call him fake news. So I have to let him ask the question. I can't attack the guy asking the question. So I'll attack the source of the story that nobody can really deny. You might be able to deny some of the detail, but literally nobody, because they know Jeffrey Goldberg. They know that he's none of the things I'm about to call him, but they also know that he won't have made this up. So I can't claim... Yeah, I'm going to have to claim that I don't know about it. And that makes me look really, really stupid. That makes me look as if I haven't got an idea what's going on my own watch. I haven't got any idea what's going on the bridge of my own ship. But it's better than acknowledging reality. To be thought a liar is better than to be thought incompetent. If I said that I knew about it and I don't know what to say, I'm going to look worse than I would if I said I don't know anything about it. The entire world, every front page in the United States of America, every front page in this country, I don't know what other European countries are doing, but let's just say, metaphorically at least, every front page in the world has got this story on it. And the man in charge, he knows nothing.
Mr. President, your reaction to the story in The Atlantic that said that some of your top cabinet officials and aides had been discussing very sensitive material through Signal and included an Atlantic reporter for that. What is your response to that?
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. Not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it. You're saying that they had what?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and
having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
With the Houthis.
The Houthis? You mean the attack on the Houthis? Right. Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective. I can tell you that. I don't know anything about it. You're telling me about it for the first time.
And again, should have come back, shouldn't they? Are you really telling me, Mr. President, that you don't know anything about this event that is all that anybody in Washington is talking about? Excuse me, could I just ask your advisors, did you honestly not brief the president on this incident? Does he truly know nothing about it? Just make them squirm. Forget politeness, forget protocol, get chucked out of the Oval Office, make them squirm. I'm sorry, Mr. President, you know nothing? You want me to explain to you what your Vice President and your National Security Advisor and your Secretary of State for Defense have been? You want me to explain to you what your top people have been doing? Because you don't know? Okay, here's the story. Who do you think in your administration should have told you about this? Who's failed to tell you about this? Who's failed to bring this to you? It's not difficult. But they're still asking questions like this is business as usual, like this is just a sort of slight twist on normality. This is just, how we do things, Mr. President. How can you not know? Take the lie, smash him around the head with it. How can you not? Okay, I'm going to believe you. You don't know. You know nothing about. How can you not know? You're POTUS. You're the commander-in-chief of the forces that your Secretary of State for Defense has compromised, and you don't know about it? Come on. First estate, corrupt. Second estate, corrupt. Third estate, under attack. Fourth estate, it's all you've got left, America. All you've got left is journalism. You've got to change your game. If he lies to you, you've got to either call him a liar or you've got to run with his lie. When he says, tell me that story, explain that story. Don't explain the story. Ask him how the hell he doesn't know about it. How do you not know about that? How can you not know about... Do you think you should resign, Mr. President, for being ignorant of something that is absolutely cutting to the heart of national security and the safety of American personnel? Who in your administration do you think should have told you about this? Take the lie, burn him with it. But they can't, because they're not ready yet to acknowledge just how completely changed the world is. And it's taken 2 months. It took 30 years to turn us into a country where Liz Truss could become Prime Minister. It's taken 2 months to turn America into a place where the President of the United States of America can claim on live national television that he knows nothing about a story that everybody in America is talking about.
James O'Brien on LBC.
How do you think it ends then? I mean, I don't know what the historical parallel will be. I don't know. I mean, people talk a lot about 1930s Germany. I don't think that there is going to be an attempt to exterminate an entire ethnicity or an entire section of society. I don't think there is. Maybe I'll come back and be haunted by those words. Did the spell break in Germany when the death camps were finally breached? I genuinely don't know. What happened in Italy? I don't know that fascistic feeling ever went away in Italy. It's back in the box seat, isn't it, politically speaking? How does it end for the United States, which doesn't have a history of far-right government, doesn't have a history of authoritarian leadership? However much you might hate imperialism or American influence on the world, it doesn't domestically have a history of fascistic leadership. So how does it end? I mean, how many MAGA people will be watching this and giving a hoot? I genuinely don't know, but I do know this. Everybody normal has to start recognizing that they are in the abnormal. Incredible, those clips. And I'll play the Hesketh one again in a minute, but let's hear from some other people first. Alan's in Bury. Alan, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. I just think what an amazing last caller we had as well.
Anthony in Bletchley Park. He's one of my greats. He's one of my classics.
Yeah, no.
One of my greatest hits. On my greatest hits tape is Anthony in Bletchley Park. And it's a big tape, Alan. It's a big tape. Anyway, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, it's a bit ironic. He's from Bletchley Park because what I wanted to say, what I was saying to the producer was the implications for Britain. Because by all accounts, we are joined.
It may not be ironic, Alan.
Yeah, it's as in, we are joined umbilically to the Americans regarding intelligence, the Five Eyes system.
Well, exactly. I just want to very briefly, before you fill your boots, I just want to remind once again why I love you so much. Not you personally, Alan, but everybody.
Oh, that's all right, James.
Oh, I know, but I do love you. But I also love Colin and I love Rob. I love everybody who's made this joke in the context of talking about Five Eyes and what it would look like without the United States in it, because they've all made the same joke. And Colin says, we can't really call it Four Eyes. Now can we? Which manages to raise a smile on my grizzled fizzog even at times of international peril like this. So what is going on, Alan, and what does it mean?
Well, I mean, the Americans, they've got over there, I think they've got Menwith Hill, they've got Filingdales. Apparently, they pay a large chunk of GCHQ. We've got GCHQ at Cheltenham, we've got GCHQ at Bude, we've got GCHQ at Cyprus. I think they've got a listening station at Gibraltar. We are sharing intelligence left, right and centre. The Americans have got 3 Air Force bases. They've got Mildenhall, Lakenheath and Fairford. And the thing is, though, what if their conversation had compromised, just say, a deep sleep agent in Moscow? It was, I think the consequences are unbelievable, and we've probably not even thought of them yet.
Are we uniquely exposed on this in the UK, much more so than other European countries? I'm not sure we are. I just wondered if you think you can answer that question.
I think the problem. I think it goes back. It does go back to the Second World War, and ever since, and they have done trusted us more than anyone else.
Fair enough.
And the other, the other thing is, like, Keir is trying to be a bridge between Europe and America, and that bridge looks like it's being swept away
already, especially
with J.D. Vance. And I'm just waiting for the moment that they actually turn on us. And then it's decision time for us.
Well, I'm glad you've phrased it in that way. I still think it's a little bit easy to attack him for the tack that he's taking, because the alternative is to be attacked.
No, I think Kay's playing the only cards he can play.
Yeah, that's what I think.
And everyone's saying that. He is trying his best, but I think they're that unhinged.
But the attack will come. It feels inevitable. You're just prolonging the inevitable by cozying up or by keeping lines of communication open. The idea of being a bridge. I mean, the problem is none of this sits comfortably alongside the other bits. So you describe, and it's one of my favourite analogies, so you'll forgive me for wheeling it out again. You describe the difficulty of detaching ourselves from United States, even just simply military and intelligence interests, as being like trying to get the eggs out of a baked cake, right? It's inconceivably difficult, if not impossible. And then we talk about the inevitability of the approach that Starmer has taken. It's interesting that none of his political opponents are criticising it. There are plenty of people in the Labour movement who are criticising it, or plenty of Labour voters who feel he must do more, he must go further, he must stand up to Trump. I think most people, pragmatic, informed people, recognise that is currently impossible. But then the third leg of the stool is the inevitability of Trump eventually turning on him, at which point it may end up looking retrospectively ridiculous to have tried to mollify him or keep him sweet in the first place. The man is damned if he does and damned if he doesn't at the moment.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think he is playing the cards, the only cards he
how does it end?
He can play. Oh God, I don't know. I think that book's still being written, James.
Yeah, I think you're right. But nobody knows. And what's the historical precedent? What do you point at and say, well, this is how an administrator... I mean, it could be Turkey. It could end up with him locking up his political rivals. He'd be watching Erdogan at the moment and taking notes, just like he's been watching Putin for years and taking notes, watching Netanyahu and taking notes. One of Netanyahu's recent targets has talked about a belief that he wants him dead. This is the former head, or the current head of Israel's domestic intelligence agency, has accused Benjamin Netanyahu of trying to imprison or even execute him. Erdogan is imprisoning his political rivals, as we know. Trump is deporting people who haven't done anything wrong. I wonder, I don't know who the main cheerleaders are in this country for Donald Trump. I read the occasional Richard Littlejohn article in the Daily Mail, but the editorial slant of so much of our coverage seems incapable of grasping the gravity of the situation. Let's hop from Lancashire to Cumbria. Bryce is in Kendal. Bryce, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me call again.
You're very welcome.
I think your question about how bad it can be, I think this is the worst crisis we've seen since the Second World War. And your previous caller there about us being umbilically connected is correct. But I think we have to start the unwinding process somewhere, and if we don't, we're going to be in serious peril. I mean, in going back to the Atlantic article and the response to that journalist, if I was him, I'd be getting myself and my family out of the country as soon as possible, because if not, I think he will definitely have charges laid against him, made up by somebody. I mean, Trump has spent his previous term getting the courts ready for him, getting all the other mechanisms ready for him to take over power, and he's already ignoring the courts. You know, the flights to send so-called criminals to Venezuela were not turned round when the court ordered they should be. People are being stopped at the border. He just now...
Well, it's the rule of law. I think Simon Marks made this crystal clear to us about a week and a half ago. The rule of law is under attack from the executive. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary, but it is also a song we've seen before, a song we've heard before, albeit not in the United States of America. I mean, I think the scale of the tragedy is highlighted by the nature of the resistance. So the Supreme Court justice, the head of the Supreme Court, is actually doing things that are really going to annoy Donald Trump, despite being widely perceived as a Donald Trump appointment. It's going to come down to personal integrity. I read somewhere that I forget which body it was, Mussolini demanded declarations of loyalty from a certain cohort of society. I think it might have been judges. And there were about 150 of them, and only 4 refused to sign it. And I get that. I think it's easy for us to sit here and say, why aren't more? It's easy for me to sit here and say, if I was in the Oval Office, I'd be doing this, that, and the other. But you're right. If I was this fella, my wife would be suggesting that we pack up and move.
Yeah, I mean, look who he's got. He's taken over the Department of Justice. He's taken over the FBI. He's taken over the military. He's got his cronies in every corner of power. So, I mean, journalists can highlight whatever they want, but he is done.
Oh, Kash Patel at the FBI. I mean, these are cronies who are currently, and I don't understand the Constitution enough to say this definitively, but they are going to be people across whose desks, at the very least, any prospect of prosecution under the Espionage Act for what's happened in this exchange would pass. So he knows what he's doing when he puts these people who appear to the outside world to be barely qualified to punch their way out of a wet paper bag. That's exactly who he wants in the most important and the most powerful positions, precisely because they can't punch their way out of a wet paper bag.
And it's you say he takes notes from Putin. I think he is taking instructions.
I don't know.
In terms of it's all his playbook.
I can say this, and you can agree. He hasn't done a single thing that Vladimir Putin would be cross about.
No, but look at the Canada playbook now. Yeah. So it's all being laid out for a long-term plan. We have one state, Alberta, that has a minority population that is pro-Trump and pro-America. So how many years down the road do we expect the little green men in unmarked combat uniforms to be organising militia in Alberta?
It becomes Crimea.
Yes.
Again, the playbook, the fascist playbook, is becoming an instruction manual for the leader of the free world. And it is impossible to exaggerate. I noticed something, Bryce, when you opened. My hyperbole alarm has switched itself off. When you said this is the worst crisis since the Second World War, I know what you mean by that. We can point at other crises. We can point at military conflicts. We can point at Suez. We can point at all sorts of things that will challenge that analysis in various different ways. But it's not hyperbole to say it anymore. The scale of this is so enormous that it's close to unthinkable.
I try to temper myself.
Me too.
I'm in my 60s. I grew up in the 70s, watching cruise missiles drive around East Anglia on trailers, and protect and survive and all that stuff. And I just find this is utterly extraordinary that we can get the United States of America into this position. It's just unthinkable, really, but it's happened, and we have to deal with it.
And I wonder what the. I wonder what the next chapter is. I sat here a month ago and found myself thinking, what will happen next? It wasn't even a month ago, was it? For me, if I were to draw a graph of spikes of shock and horror, probably the Oval Office, probably Zelensky in the Oval Office, in terms of something that happened on live television, in terms of something that happened in real time. So you get the Goldberg report in the Atlantic, but then you get the liar in the Oval Office, and then you get the liar in the Defense Department, and that's happening in front of us in real time, like a bloody box set. So those spikes there, but then all the other spikes that aren't actually being broadcast by news media at volume 10 every day, the stuff he's dismantling, the appointments he's making, the damage that he's doing to institutions, the deportations that he's calling. So here's a phrase, right? The United States President Donald Trump pardons people who attacks police and threatens to deport people that attack cars. Fact, not opinion, counting. President Trump pardons people that attacked police, threatens to deport people that attack cars manufactured by, inevitably, Elon Musk. I think you'll be fine attacking a Ford, but if you attack a Tesla, Donald Trump is talking about deporting you. And I'll tell you who I reserve my most steely contempt for now. Don't worry about what he says, focus on what he does brigade. Where have they gone? Where are they now? Probably in Nice with their trotters up. No, don't do that. But where are they now? Although don't worry about what he says. What you people don't understand about Donald Trump. I once met him in a lift. You've got to focus on what he says. You don't need to worry about you've got to focus on what he does. Don't worry about what he said. Where are you, lads? Still worrying about what he does and not what he says? What if what he says is absolutely disgusting? What if what he says is a lie so egregious that journalists don't know how to respond to it? Because that is where we are. Simon Marks joins me next. I just mentioned him. He will be talking to us live from Washington about this absolute, what do you even call it, brouhaha doesn't touch the sides. But here's Thomas Watts with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
5 minutes to 12 is the time, and I tell you what's quiet this morning, Idiot's Corner. Very hard to imagine how anybody would pick holes or find fault with the analysis of events in the United States that we've been providing since 10 o'clock this morning. I'll keep an eye out, though, because I don't want it getting too lonely in there. I guess Idiot's Corner could be full of people who've spent the last few months claiming that you shouldn't look at what Donald Trump says, you should only focus on what he does, because if ever an argument has been rendered absolutely ridiculous, then it is that one. Simon Marks joins me now live from Washington, D.C., where have you got your head around this yet, Simon?
Well, it does occur to me, James, that never has a major international scoop fallen into the hands of a journalist with less work. I mean, imagine being Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein today. You know, the Washington Post guys who had to go to parking garages at 2 o'clock in the morning to meet Deep Throat, who spent months working away at it, trying to bring down the Nixon administration. And here's Jeffrey Goldberg with a major global scoop simply because the National Security Advisor of the United States, Mike Waltz, appears inadvertently to have dropped him into a Signal group chat. This is emblematic of what happens to a government when it is stripped of all competence, when a government is entirely staffed at senior levels by people who are hired because they are either proven Make America Great Again supporters of Donald Trump's political movement, or they're people who might have criticised him in the past but have publicly bent the knee before him and suddenly pledged their fealty to him. There are no restraining influences in this government. This we already knew. There are no adults in the room. There are no people with significant amounts of national security experience who can say, fellas, we can't discuss this on Signal. I mean, that's not what we're supposed to be doing. There are secure channels of communication within the American government specifically designed to avoid the prying eyes of the Chinese, the Russians, anybody else that wants to do the United States harm. Maybe even the Houthis, from being able to monitor these kinds of communications. And so the idea that this took place, and it may not have been the first time. I mean, it didn't seem that these people, nobody in the chat, according to Goldberg's telling of events, even raised the question of whether they should be doing this on Signal. It almost seems like it was a perfectly normal channel of communication for them to be using. I mean, the Chinese and the Russians have got to be just, laughing as the day is long, and presumably poring over secrets that have already leaked out of this government.
How? I'm going to ask you to get your scales out. And on one side of the scales is the egregious incompetence of what we're witnessing, as you've just articulated. And on the other, the content, albeit that the most damning elements of what Jeffrey Goldberg could see. Jeffrey Goldberg is the grown-up in the room who has declined to actually air those, which, of course, as we'll get on to, gives Pete Hesketh the opportunity to lie about what actually happened and to claim that there is nothing, or to essentially call Jeffrey Goldberg a liar. What's worse, the incompetence or the content? The context or the content?
Well, I think it depends where you're looking at it from. If you're looking at it from this side, the mere fact that they were doing it is catastrophic here in Washington, D.C. There are all sorts of calls for heads to roll. I think a lot now will hinge on the supine Republicans in Congress and whether they find a backbone and stand up to Trump and say, at least National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, formerly, by the way, one of them, has to go. I mean, are we going to see heads rolling? But if you're sitting in number 10 today, there are huge questions that arise from this. Can the UK continue sharing British intelligence with the Americans through its membership of the Five Eyes group? That's the group that brings the UK, the US, the Canadians, the Australians and the New Zealanders, the Kiwis, together in an intelligence sharing arrangement. There were already questions about how safe the other partners' secrets might be with US officials like Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, someone about whom there are enormous questions pertaining to her relationship with Russia. But this really raises, I spoke to one former senior official last night, and I said, how can the UK, for example, continue sharing intelligence with the United States? And flatly, the answer was they can't, they shouldn't, they mustn't. So there's big questions there. And also, if you look at the content of this, it also reveals further the Trump administration's inside attitude towards the UK and Europe. Because when J.D. Vance starts raising questions about whether it's the right thing to do, he says President Trump, should not necessarily have approved this action this early, because he points out only 3% of American trade passes through the Red Sea and 40% of European trade passes through the Red Sea. So he's worried that it's going to be difficult to explain why the US government is doing this at a time when President Trump is saying if Europe wants to help itself, it needs to do more to help itself in defense terms. Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, chimes in and starts making the argument that after the military action is over, possibly the United States is going to need to go to the Europeans and say, you owe us a bit of money for doing this, because, most of your trade, the trade that passes through these shipping lanes, ends up in European shops and on European dinner plates and in European car plants. So this notion that they have definitely an antithesis towards Europe, but also view even military action against a group they define as terrorists through an entirely mercantile perspective is absolutely breathtaking.
Yes, it is hard to focus on the most breathtaking element of it, and that may render my next question unfair, because I'm going to ask you to turn up with a traditional toolbox, entirely untraditional events. If this had happened a year ago, what would have happened next? What would the Department of Justice or the FBI or Congress, what would have happened? What do you? And I know this is going to be slightly speculative, but it's a constitutional question, really. What would have happened?
Oh, absolutely. It's a totally constitutional question. And we're going to get an answer to part of that question on Wednesday, because before all this broke yesterday, the CIA Director John Ratcliffe and Tulsi Gabbard, the aforementioned Director of National Intelligence, they were due to be at a hearing on Capitol Hill on Wednesday talking about worldwide terror threats. Let's see if that goes ahead, because if it goes ahead, the Democrats in Congress will obviously assail them over what's taken place here. If this had happened in non-Trump times, if this had happened during the Biden administration or any administration prior to Trump 1, immediately there would have been congressional hearings called. Immediately. Orders going out to make sure that no communications relating to this, no paper, no messages were deleted. Goldberg says Mike Waltz has his signal chat set so that the messages disappear after a certain period of time.
That's the Espionage Act straight away.
That's completely counter to American law. Yeah. Any government communication has to be kept and placed in the National Archives. You would have seen the Justice Department launching an immediate criminal investigation of everyone involved in this, by the way, including Goldberg, because it looks like he got out of the chat. Yeah. After he knew that these were the real principals that he was witnessing chatting among themselves. He got out of the chat after he'd verified that when the bombs started falling on Yemen, because otherwise he might be culpable under the Espionage Act as well. So there would be major process by the two co-equal branches of government alongside the presidency, Congress and the judiciary. And if that doesn't happen now, if literally we're waiting to see whether Donald Trump tolerates this or simply decides that Mike Waltz has got to go and that'll tidy it up and we'll move on to the next Trump-initiated distraction, that will tell you more about the collapse of American democracy that is ongoing here day by day, hour by hour.
All of which explains why Trump, like a cornered ferret, felt this morning that he had no choice but to claim that he knew nothing about the biggest story in the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, he always does that. He's never heard of anybody. He'd never heard of Project 2025. He had nothing to do with it. And then he came into office and suddenly he started implementing it sentence by sentence, page by page. And of course, he trashed The Atlantic as well in his first reaction to this, saying, as far as he knew, it was a failing news magazine. I think Jeffrey Goldberg's name is obviously, it's already being dragged through the mud by Hegseth. I think Goldberg's going to have a very complicated few days ahead. He's a strong man and he's a very intelligent man, unlike many of the people within the Trump administration and on Capitol Hill that are undoubtedly about to be unleashed upon him. But, Donald Trump is the leader of the ship who sat in the Oval Office alongside Pete Hegseth a week ago as Hegseth waxed lyrical about the fact that under his leadership, nobody around the world takes the Defense Department for fools anymore. Well, I mean, that claim did not age well.
A master of understatement. That claim indeed did not age well. Final question. If the journalist who asked him this morning about it and opened the opportunity for him to deny, if he'd pushed back and said, and esprit d'escalier is a wonderful thing, we can all get everything 100% right with the benefit of 20/20 hindsight, but if he'd pushed back and said simply, how can you not know, Mr. President? Who do you, in your administration, do you feel should have briefed you about this incredibly important national security story that the whole world is talking about? What time did you get out of bed this morning? I think it could be as rude as you want. But what would have happened to that journalist?
Well, it's the old Watergate question, isn't it? Go back to Woodward and Bernstein. What did the president know and when did he know it?
Yeah.
I think, actually, I suspect that the president would simply have engaged in the usual load of old flannel.
Yeah.
And whether anything specific would have happened to that journalist would depend partly on the president's relationship with him and with the news organization that he represents. What we'll see, I'm sure, at the White House now is that every time Donald Trump appears in front of cameras over the next several days, the quote-unquote reporters in the room, and remember, many of these people are not reporters now, they are propagandists with pro-Trump far-right broadcast and streaming networks and websites and newspapers. They'll be the ones there chucking softballs at him again in a bid to give him an assist, because we're seeing that every single day at this White House. So the accountability that existed in the Woodward and Bernstein era is really threatened today by the way in which this White House games the outcome of events every single day when the president's on camera.
Wow. On a much, much lighter note, I'll have a go at your first point about, has a journalist ever had a bigger story drop right into their lap? That was in December 2007. So a journalist on the news desk of the Daily Mirror who literally just picked up a randomly ringing phone and spoke to a woman who said, you know that bloke who disappeared in a canoeing accident a few years ago? I think I've just seen him on the website of an estate agent in Panama. So, it's not quite up there on an international scale, but it's why you should never, as you well know, Simon Marks, you should never walk past a ringing phone in a newsroom. Or indeed
I will simply say, James, I will simply say, my signal is open.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon Marks. A lot of love coming in for you on my screen, as we would expect and as we always see, but cutting, absolutely to the heart of it as well, without any fear or favour. It's 11:48.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:51. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There were 18 individuals assembled on this group, by the way. We've only mentioned some of them, but Jeffrey Goldberg, a journalist, thinks that SM would stand for Stephen Miller, that TG would stand for Tulsi Gabbard, MAR, Marco Antonio Rubio, VP, obviously, Vice President, and on it goes. Extraordinary. 18, arguably the 18 most senior members, certainly when matters foreign policy are separated from matters domestic. 18 most senior members of Donald Trump's administration, all party to an act of almost unbelievable incompetence. And I just want to pick up on one thing that Simon Marks said a moment ago about the populating of the Oval Office with saps, sycophants and cronies. It makes our client journalism look almost respectable, what Donald Trump is doing to the fourth estate in the actual Oval Office. James Madison, father of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in the United States of America, he nailed it many, many moons ago when he wrote, "A popular government without popular information or the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy, or perhaps both." Wow. Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives you. So that is pretty clearly a description of the price to be paid by a republic stripped of essential information. And that is what he's trying to do. And he is succeeding. Because when he said, I don't know, I know nothing about it. And when I keep getting his name wrong. I've got a mental block on this. Hesgeth or Hegseth. When he said, don't message me, I'll find it and correct myself. I'll say it 100 times in my head and indeed out loud during the next news. Hegseth. Yeah, I'll do it off air. I think it might be a bit weird on air. He is describing what happens when the truth dies. And they've both lied today. The president has lied about not knowing, or the president is telling the truth about not knowing the biggest story in the world this morning. And that's even worse than being a liar, I would argue. And the Secretary of State for Defence has lied about what he did in this chat. And the only reason he can get away with the lie is because the journalist was so worried about being in breach of the Espionage Act that he removed himself from the conversation as soon as he'd established that it was actually the conversation that he thought it was. As Simon said so powerfully, when the bombs actually started dropping. Bob's in Bolden in Tyne and Wear. Bob, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. I've been barred from speaking about Trump in the House for about the last year. So I've been watching it so closely, and I am obsessed with it. But I've spent a long time trying to get positives out of negatives.
Yes.
And I think we all do. But at the moment, probably the majority of American people are appalled by what's happening. A minority love it. In the world, I think the time for clutching of pearls by the world should now be over, and we need some leadership that says the gift that we got from this disgraceful breach of intelligence is that they were all there, as you said. They were all in on it. But the great gift that it gives us is something to absolutely circle around for the world to now say, guys, we love Americans, but as you see, this is what happens with your current regime. And for that reason, we have to take a stance and not allow our secrets to go out there. It's undeniable that it happened. It's proven that it happened. They'll try and deny it. And the other thing I was going to say, James, and I don't know whether it gets any traction with you, at the moment, Musk is out there up front, ready to take the flak like some kind of umbrella. And when he ditches him, Trump will possibly come away relatively unscathed. And I think there needs to be a movement where we say the Elon Trump rather than Elon Musk all the time and put them up front. We need Elon Trump and tie them irrevocably together.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a slight danger there in the second bit of your analysis of using a toolbox of, I mean, that's quite a good name for his cabinet, actually, now I come to think of it, but using a traditional toolbox to deal with entirely untraditional problems. I think even if you tied them together, Trump's like a sort of Houdini. And he'd pop out the next day saying, do you know what he'd do, Bob?
Yeah.
He'd say, Elon who?
Yeah.
He would. He would. I mean, who here would put $10 on him not actually pretending that he never met, claiming he can't even remember who Elon Musk is?
He's a fool. He knows nothing. Look, his rockets blow up.
He's also a genius in a really weird way. I mean, you know, in terms of that gift, if you like, that superpower that narcissistic personality syndrome can bestow upon its most severe sufferers, because it means that nothing ever touches you. Empathy, compassion, truth, reality, objectivity, facts, none of it. It's coming up to 11:57. Do you know, I just wanted to check something. I've got an idiot's corner here. Thank goodness. Lawrence, thank you, mate. I was getting worried that someone's got to go and check the heating and turn the lights on. Lawrence writes, the more O'Brien attacks Trump, the more I grow to like Trump, which is fantastic. You know, the more people condemn fascism, the more I love fascism. But I just wanted to check whether Hitler derangement syndrome was a thing, whether or not, you know, that there was, whether or not that was in common parlance. And people, you're just obsessed. Because when Bob said then he's not allowed to talk about Trump at home. And it's in the Urban Dictionary. It's a pejorative term, usually for criticism or negative reactions to Adolf Hitler that are perceived to be irrational and to have little regard to his actual policy position. So, you know, Brexit derangement syndrome, Trump derangement syndrome, they have a wonderful family tree at the bottom of which sits Hitler derangement syndrome. Mark's in Plymouth. Mark, what would you like to say?
Oh, yeah, just a quick point, really, about Trump and his cronies always having a go at NATO and European countries. I understand that I think they should have put more money into NATO, don't get me wrong, but the USA very rarely, and Trump will be a classic example of this, will very rarely talk about the massive benefit America has received over the years for having bases all around the world.
Yes.
Which protects their interests.
We did touch on this, but no one can listen to every syllable of the whole 2 hours. But that's why I use the phrase "getting the eggs out of a baked cake." You can't. It's very hard to press reverse on this reality.
I'm just hoping that the rest of the world realises. I don't think it's just Trump, by the way. I think this is a change now. That's it. And a long-term change, unfortunately. And you might get somebody else in after Trump who is less imbecilic, but still has the same negative impact in some of their actions. But I think we have to become stronger without America, and it's going to be very painful and difficult to do, especially when you export so much. You know, Canada, for example, exports 80% of their goods to them. So, but we need to get away from America and say, right, we've got to build a stronger European. I think Brexit was a disaster, as you probably can guess. But we need to build a stronger Europe and stronger relations with other countries around the world, and because that will impact.
And you can conceive. We can conceive of circumstances, hopefully years as opposed to decades hence, where a historian will write about how it turned out to be a blessing in disguise that Europe turned away from the United States of America and reforged new alliances, European alliances and Commonwealth alliances even that would have seemed unthinkable in the decades immediately after the Second World War. And it's not much of a silver lining, and it's a heck of a long way off, and there is no guarantee of delivery. But it is still a silver lining of sorts. It is coming up to 12 noon. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Moving on next, I've got two choices for you. One is a message I'm getting a lot now about the European Union, and it touched on events of the last 2 hours. And the other is born of the fact, very simply, that I have finally got around to watching Adolescence. I watched it at the weekend, all 4 episodes. More or less inhaled them, to be honest with you, and I have questions. So it's a tough choice, and I might leave it up to you. I might not. I reserve the right to pretend I've never even met you. But what do you want to do next? Brexit or Adolescence? Drop me a text or even a WhatsApp, but not a signal.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm going to make you a little... Well, listen, you know that I get overwhelmed by events, overtaken by events. And I can never make a complete promise. But looking at something quite interesting has happened. It's not quite as clear-cut as we might like, but a preponderance of women want to talk about Adolescence, the Netflix drama, which has broken all records, all viewing records in this country, and which is a piece of drama that possibly even supersedes the Post Office drama with regard to the impact that it's had on society. And I didn't think I'd be saying that within a year or two of the Post Office drama that Toby Jones starred in. So a rough majority, a big but not obviously complete majority of women texting me want to talk about Adolescence, and a majority of men want to talk about, it's not Brexit, I'll tell you what the topic is, but it is a Brexit topic. And that actually fits in with the conversation that I wanted to have about Adolescence. I want to see why the issues and events depicted in that programme, which you don't need to have seen to talk about because I will explain to you what they are, seem to land a little bit differently with men, or quite a lot differently with men and women. So do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give you some homework, just in case you've only got an hour of it left to watch, or you haven't started it yet. You only really need to watch probably episode 1 and episode 2 to contribute to a conversation about it. But I'm gonna do that tomorrow or Friday, depending on events. Okay? Have we ever done this before? Which gives you an opportunity to watch it if you haven't, and B, gives me an opportunity to avoid any spoilers for people that are so minded. I don't think it's really susceptible to spoiler alerts, but hey ho, I could be wrong. And therefore we will definitely talking about it. And it gives you an opportunity to be even better informed about it than you currently are. And of course, if you are already fully informed, if like me you've watched the flipping thing, then you could then you can just look forward. You can come up with some zingers that you'll be able to contribute to the program when we finally get around to talking about it. Because this is a weird one. Okay? For me, this is a weird one. I don't know how long you've been listening to this program, but if you have any sort of knowledge of what was happening at around 2016, 2017, somebody turbocharged this radio show, right? The events of Brexit and the frankly supine nature of much of the British media that had been loudly supportive of it, sadly and somewhat embarrassingly, including people who've got exactly the same job as me, such epic levels of ignorance and failure to understand the most basic issues meant that there were hardly any places in the UK media where you could go to discover the truth about what was going to happen as a consequence of voting to leave the European Union. And if anything, even we didn't go far enough, but we were close to unique in the chronicling of reality and the prediction of facts. There were occasions, of course, where other people could lie to you about what was going to happen, or at least make claims that had no basis in evidence or fact. I think most obviously of Jacob Rees-Mogg's infamous appearance on this show. Every single thing he claimed in that encounter has turned out to be complete hogwash. What a surprise. But otherwise, it was a show that was a bastion. I even spoke at one of the marches. I even spoke at Parliament Green. I even walked out in front of thousands of people and bored them all rigid. So I did become quite heavily associated with hopes for a second referendum, which in retrospect I think were probably a little naive. You have to rub people's faces in what they've done before they will fully appreciate it. And goodness knows we've had enough of that now. And dedicated. And the longer it went on, the more dedicated I became to giving people the facts that they needed. You could say better late than never, but they didn't become facts until later, did they? They didn't become facts until the impacts started to be counted, until the red tape started to be introduced, until the people started to leave. So it's all there. So you would think, wouldn't you, when the noise begins, and it has now begun in earnest. It was even debated in the House of Commons yesterday as a consequence of a petition smashing through the 100,000 mark. And I don't think the fact that you didn't know about that is proof of any bias in the media on this occasion, because the debates that are prompted by petitions rarely get much news coverage. But it's interesting that it received significant support to merit a debate in the House of Commons. You would think, as messages coming into this studio now proliferate, saying, why doesn't Keir Starmer call a second referendum? Or why don't Labour talk about rejoining the European Union? And then one of the journalists I admire most, I went a bit Don McLean then, the Father, Son and Holy Ghost. One of the journalists I admire most, Polly Toynbee in The Guardian, writes today about the obvious link between Brexit and growth and the incredibly frustrating purdah that the government has imposed upon itself when it comes to simply stating that one of the reasons why things are in such a mess, probably the biggest reason, is because of that ludicrous act of national self-harm that you were encouraged to undertake by the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nadine Dorries and Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove. I could go on, but I can't because I'll probably be a bit sick in my mouth. And you would imagine I would be four square on that side of the argument, right? That would be, why don't the Labour government, why don't they actually start calling for reintegration? Or why? Because you can't really be dedicated to growth while saying nothing about the biggest obstacle to growth that this country currently has. As Polly Toynbee writes today, Labour is so paralysed by Brexit that despite its hunt for growth, it has said nothing about the huge sums that leaving the EU has cost the economy. And these aren't opinions, this is counting. The CER, the Centre for European Reform, says about 5% of GDP. That's a vast sum. 1% of Britain's GDP is about £25.6 billion. The London School of Economics found that the UK lost, wait for it, £27 billion in exports to the EU in the first 2 years after leaving. The Office for Budget Responsibility, set up by George Osborne to ensure that governments couldn't massage numbers, reckons Britain has seen a 15% reduction in trade. It is stunning. The Food and Drink Federation reports that exports are down 34%. That was this month. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research found that businesses have now invested 12.4% less than they would have done if Brexit hadn't happened. 40,000 finance jobs left the city soon after Brexit. High earners who've quit the country. It's estimated the Treasury lost about £1 billion a year in tax. Did you see the story this year about UK medicine shortages? Hit the button, Keith. Something else that we've discussed on this programme while much of the UK media remained silent. Shortages brought about as a consequence of the self-imposed restrictions we introduced through Brexit. 5 years on, and it still defines the UK economy. It is frankly pathetic to pretend otherwise. I will even let you, if it keeps you out of idiot corner, I will even let you pretend that it could have gone better. All right? I'll let you have that. There is a good Brexit, but it goes to a different school. Because it's not worth relitigating that conversation. It's not relitigating that argument. And you would imagine, given my track record, given my history, and given my convictions, my passions for things like freedom of movement and economic growth, weirdo, right? And now, of course, as we've discovered, the necessity, if not the importance, of a European army or an America free force in which we can play a full and powerful part, but which the United States of America will not be in charge of or even contributing to. If you don't know why that's important, just ask Vladimir Zelensky. So you would imagine that I would be shouting from the rooftops about the necessity of two things. Number one, Labour attacking Brexit. And number two, Labour pursuing a recalibration of our relationship with the European Union, up to and perhaps including rejoining. So, why am I not on that bus? When, without being too conceited, you might have expected me to be the driver. Why am I not on that bus? I'm increasingly wondering whether it's a mistake not to be on that bus, but I want to tell you my thinking. My reasoning is that there is no earthly way the European Union will contemplate an actual return until it has ceased to be a political hot potato in this country. So I've seen some polling that suggests only 11% of the population now consider Brexit to have been a good idea or to have gone well. They're not quite the same question, actually, so I should double check. You are absolutely mistaken if you think they would welcome us back with open arms while we still have a febrile political atmosphere in which ne'er-do-wells like Nigel Farage continue to receive or enjoy enormous amounts of attention. The political capital that bad actors could make by attacking any attempts to go back are not relevant domestically. It wouldn't do much harm to Keir Starmer, but it would prove that we can't go back because we could come out again. So, and that is such a disruptive experience. It's as if the Brexit in this country was reported as if only one person in a couple ever gets divorced. It's extraordinary, right? it was hugely disruptive and incredibly inconvenient and profoundly unpleasant for our former partners in the European Union. The amount of effort. Remember that picture when their negotiator turned up with filing cabinets full of paperwork and David Davis turned up with a big biro and a cheesy grin. An indication of how much work they knew would need to be done while David Davis didn't have a bloody clue about anything. Hold the front page. Plus ça change. So it's never going to happen until it's dead as a political issue in this country. And spoiler alert, it's not. So that's part one of my reasoning. Part two is if that's true, and it is, if that's true, what is to be gained by Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves repeatedly reminding us that it is one of the major reasons why we are struggling to build economic growth? It's the major reason why we are struggling to build economic growth. Because it doesn't feel like a very good excuse. So you remember when Boris Johnson was blaming all of his travails on the war in Ukraine and the pandemic? I think Liz Truss tried the same. And there was some truth in it. Of course, there was enormous economic impacts of the war in Ukraine and the pandemic. But Boris Johnson would have blamed having dirty underpants on the war in Ukraine and the pandemic if he thought he could get away with it. Such was his ludicrous relationship with reality, which, of course, was what saw him eventually resign from the House of Commons before he could be held to account by a committee of his own peers. So if it ain't ever going to happen, and this is where I'm beginning to think I might have got it wrong. If it ain't ever going to happen, and I've not got that wrong, then what is to be gained from pointing at it all the time? How would it help for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves to keep reminding voters that the main reason why growth is so hard to achieve is because we literally voted to impose economic sanctions on ourselves? So if you can't lift the economic sanctions that we voted to impose on ourselves, what political capital can be accrued by the governing party that was opposed to those sanctions, opposed to that vote, but sadly led by a man who you could have been forgiven for not noticing was leading a party passionately opposed to it all? What political capital can be accrued by Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves by pointing at the fact that the economic sanctions we voted to impose upon ourselves continue to do a bloody good job of hindering our economic growth? Answer that question. I'll give you the money myself. 0345 6060973. Because I can feel those unfamiliar inklings of being wrong. There might be an answer to this question. Polly Toynbee provides one this morning. She talks about we need to go Switzerland. We should be aiming for Switzerland, in but not in. Complex patchwork of agreements for goods only, so it shoots some of the more xenophobic foxes. Food and product safety agreements, dynamic alignment, electricity, which Britain wants too. It's inside Horizon, it's inside Erasmus. It's got freedom of movement, but it's also got an emergency brake. So, I mean, it's complicated. It's tricky and it's controversial, but that's what good politicians do, isn't it? Complicated, tricky and controversial things. So I don't think going to be persuaded that I'm wrong about the first bit, which is the impossibility of actually rejoining, which means I'll need persuading that I'm wrong about the second bit. Because we can't rejoin, there's no point even talking about it. And then the third bit, what about Switzerland? What about a really concerted effort to make much bigger bonds with the European Union? If the Labour Party were to do that, how do you think it would play? How do you think it would play? Isaac's already cross with me. Nicely cross. I thought I told you yesterday, if you're going to criticise me, you have to start the text with, "I love you, James, but." It's the only way I can guarantee it will get read out. Isaac's not, he's missed that bus. He doesn't say, "I love you, James, but what's to be gained?" He just writes, "What's to be gained? Public opinion is shaped by public discourse. The Brexiters never shut up about it, neither should we now." But it ain't ever going to happen, the reversal. Not until it is a political damp squib. So what's to be gained from talking about it, pointing at it, calling for it, signing petitions about it, and prompting debates in the House of Commons demanding it. You tell me. I need help here. I've got I know this feeling. And it means it's time for me to change my mind. It's time for me to move. But I don't quite yet know why. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 22 minutes after 12. I think I've got one of the worst examples of misinformation for you so far. And I'll share that with you shortly. But in the meantime, what's the point of calling for, or from a political point of view, I don't want you to stop doing it, God forbid, but what would be the point of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves reminding us repeatedly that Brexit is one of the biggest obstacles, is the biggest obstacle to the economic growth we all so desperately want to see? What would be the point? Given that it's never going to happen, would it actually be a good idea? Because I don't know the answer to that question, and I thought that I did. Matt's in Orpington. Matt, what would you like to say?
Hey, James, how you doing?
I'm all right, mate. Go on.
I've got 4 answers, 4 words.
Blimey heck. Is it going to take us all the way to Sheila Fogarty?
No, they're really quick. I've got honesty, integrity, sincerity, and the last one is a reality check.
Yeah.
I also have a counter answer. It won't happen because it's not on vogue right now.
What do you mean by on vogue?
Well, right now it's on vogue to lie, to not live in reality, to say untruths, and to make everyone believe that those untruths are true. For example, we're going to turbocharge the economy without talking about customs union or the single market.
Or raising taxes, actually. I'd file that under kind of weapons-grade optimism rather than a blatant lie. I think, given what we witnessed in the Oval Office earlier, we need to distinguish between a blatant, egregious lie and over-optimistic politics. But yeah, I mean, your central point still stands. What would they lose, though, by just telling that this is the point, the specific example, and of course, so after doing all the other stuff, 14 years of Tory rule, £22 billion black hole, and of course, one of, if not the biggest contributor to this catastrophe is the Brexit that the party opposite wanted?
I think the answer to that question is 2 words. One is power and the second is vote. I think it's very simple.
You think it's a vote loser still?
I think for the Labour Party, it's a clear vote loser, unfortunately. I also have a theory. Could I tell you my theory?
Yeah, of course you can. I'm not sure I agree with you anymore about that being a clear vote loser, because it's true. So in a way, you've kind of shot your own fox.
Have you seen the USA?
I know, but you can't attack them for a lack of sincerity, honesty, and integrity if you're in the same breath saying, "Oh, and of course, if they did tell the truth, they'd lose millions of votes."
I think that they, ever since Jeremy Corbyn went up against Boris Johnson, and of course Jeremy Corbyn, who was somebody I respected and admired, but really talked about rejoining the EU. He just wasn't interested. He let's leave it up to the people, and it really hurt the Labour Party. It really hurt them, and there were conversations in rooms where they said, "This is a political poison chalice."
Yeah, but that was 2019, mate. It was true in 2019. It's not true now.
But from 2019 until 2024, they were working out, right, how can we get in power? And one of those reasons, one of those ideas is...
Yeah, I agree with that as well. But the world is... the pendulum swings. The world turns. I just don't think it's swung enough yet or turned enough yet.
And as you said earlier, it hasn't swung enough yet. And right now, my theory is that the Tories didn't fight as hard as I've seen them fight before. I'm 51 now. I've seen a lot of general elections in the UK. The Tories really didn't fight hard. And I kept watching thinking, I think you're handing over this poison chalice to the Labour Party because I think you know that we're screwed, and I think you know that you can't turbocharge the economy without rejoining, the very least, the single market and the customs union.
And that, so, I mean, you in a way highlight the broader problem, don't you, in that you were a big fan of truth, but you're also an enemy of it because it would mean you couldn't be elected.
Absolutely, I'd be a rubbish. I was about to say the S word, but I'd be a rubbish politician.
Thank goodness you didn't. Poor old Keith. He's on constant tenterhooks with me, let alone you joining in. I don't know that I agree with you because the polling has swung so much. I was trying to find the figure. Did we find the 11% figure earlier? I saw an 11% claim by a journalist based in Brussels, and I forget whether it was people who think that Brexit was a good idea or people who think that it's gone well. And the distinction is crucial because of the mythical Brexit that would have been brilliant but goes to a different school. So we've got 11% now of those polled see Brexit as more of a success than a failure. Oh, days. I said Idiot's Corner was a bit empty this morning. That's 11% of the population that you can just waltz. More of a success than a failure. Right you are, lads. Fill your boots. But with those kind of numbers in play, do you think Matt's right when he says it would still be a vote loser? I don't know. I've got to stop saying I don't know. Anybody would think I make this stuff up as I go along. Barry's in Croydon. Barry, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Barry.
I really do think that we now need to organise and really campaign to rejoin the customs union and the science agreement for the Horizon and similar agreements with agriculture, etc. I mean, even Turkey has trade agreements with the EU. I think it's called the Statement of Cooperation.
Yeah, careful with that. That's statements of cooperation don't necessarily mean anything. Kemi Badenoch used to claim she'd signed a trade deal with Texas when all she'd really done was sign a postcard.
Well, they do have Turkey do have arrangements. I don't know the full details of it, but they do have arrangements with the EU. But I mean, it would. I mean, as we know, if we did rejoin the customs union, it would add 4% to our GDP. Think they wouldn't need to do most of these cuts, which are obviously unpopular.
I don't know that this is an option, though. You can't just join. We talk about the Switzerland option.
Yeah.
That's not actually being in the free market, is it?
No, it's somewhere. I think it's somewhere short of that. But it would be a very good first step.
Hey, listen, no one's disputing that. Well, I mean, apart from the 11%, the idiot quotient, but everybody vaguely sentient recognises that it would improve economic growth. I suppose you could argue, and callers did argue with me in 2016, they don't care if it's poorer and their children can't afford to buy a house. They just want to get out of the European Union for reasons that they would then, to a man and woman, be utterly unable to articulate to me. But that's for viral clips on YouTube now. Those ships have sailed. I don't dispute a single thing you've said about the wisdom of doing it, but if I take you and set you against the last caller, Matt, he thinks it would lose votes, which means that...
No, I think, I think maybe he's half right. If we were to campaign to rejoin the EU full membership, that might still lose votes. But the customs union, if it could be sold to people saying that this would add 4% to our GDP, this would mean we could spend on this or this and not have to...
Well, even then, you're running before you can walk, even starting the process by describing the damage that it has done. And then you sow the seeds of explaining why you have to start trying to undo it. Polly Toynbee in The Guardian today writes that he's repeating the Blair Brown mistake of never explaining to voters the value of the EU. Starmer doesn't dare make bold speeches about an EU reset, and it's time he did. He might find he attracts great respect for telling the truth about what Brexit has done to us by daring to confront the Brexiters head on.
Absolutely. I think Polly's 100% right. And I think that
do too.
I think the government needs to find the courage to stand up to the Brexiteers and say, this, you've caused us so much harm, now it's time to start repairing it. We need to write to our Labour MPs, we've got over 400, and say that, we need to start this process. Because if you want growth, this is the simple way to do it.
And what would he lose by doing so? I don't agree with Matt. I don't think with the numbers where they are now, with reality where it is now, the voting arithmetic would work in his favour, not against him.
I think we got to. If we want growth, we want to make this country better. This is a good first step. We should be saying to our Labour MPs, we want you to put it into the next manifesto for the next election, if not before.
We will recalibrate. We will pursue a kind of form of partial access to the single market through a series of bilateral agreements. That's what Switzerland does, not in the European Union, not in the European Economic Area, not in the Customs Union, not in the single market, but in possession of a series of bilateral agreement that allows for free movement of goods, services, people and capital in specific sectors, which is kind of done already anyway, with the dispensations for protected sectors jobs-wise. You say, yeah, all right, you can come here if you do this because we need those and we need that. I said to you, didn't I, 10 years ago? They'll call it, what did I call it? Liberty of motion. We won't have freedom of movement, we'll have liberty of motion, and they'll pretend that they still abolished freedom of movement. I don't know. What do we lose? How does it land? Jimmy says, when I agree with Matt, polling is one thing, but when I'm out with my left-wing bubble of mates in the gym or something, let me get this right. When I'm out with not my left-wing bubble of mates, and I'm in the gym or something like that, the love for Trump and Farage is disconcertingly high. Yeah, but, if you're an admirer of either of those two, the facts don't really matter to you. I don't know that not recognising how hideous they both are means that you also can't recognise how stupid Brexit is. Farage will try and detach himself from it. He's already trying to wash his hands of it. I think Alistair Campbell tried to pick him up on it on Question Time, and he sort of said everyone's moved on. I heard someone on this radio station, I can't remember who, claiming, no, nobody wants to talk about Brexit anymore. Show me a person that doesn't want to talk about Brexit anymore, and I'll show you someone who told you to vote for it. Here's Amelia Cox with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
36 is the time, and it seems that somehow we need to move the spotlight away from egregious and unprecedented events in one country to another. We touched yesterday in some detail on events in Istanbul, in Turkey, where Erdogan is ramping up his fascistic agenda by most recently locking up his main political rival, the sitting mayor of Istanbul, also now the nominated leader of the main opposition party in Turkey. Where do you throw the spotlight next? Well, we head to Israel, where a headline that I wonder whether you ever thought you'd read has appeared this morning. Oscar-winning Palestinian director attacked by Israeli settlers and arrested. This is No Other Land, the film that won the Oscar this year and involved that wonderful acceptance speech from the directors, one of whom, there's 4 directors in total, but the two, Hamdan Bilal and Yuval Abraham, one Israeli Jew, one Palestinian, talking about the necessity of cooperation, collaboration and compassion moving forward. The only hole I'd pick in that headline is, of course, the euphemistic nature of the word settlers. These are people moving onto illegally occupied land and claiming it for their own. Raviv Rose is an international Jewish activist working with the Centre for Jewish Non-Violence. And on the ground, when this attack unfolded and the subsequent arrest by the Israeli army, you were there, Raviv. Some of the photographs that the international media has picked up, I believe, were taken by you. Can you tell us exactly what happened?
Yeah, that's right. So basically, we received a call just at the start of Iftar, the evening breakfast meal during Ramadan, that there was an attack at the school in Susia. We headed over there. We were in an adjacent village. And as we approached, there was a large number of security vehicles, police, army, settler soldiers, as well as private settler vehicles. So we took another road. They were blocking the road up to the school, which is where we received news of the attack. So we took another road to the base of the hill, and 3 of us were going to walk up on foot. As we started to walk up, we had seen a bunch of people at the top of the hill. We saw guns, so we assumed that they were soldiers. It turns out they were independent settlers. One came down and started shouting at us, and then started attacking us. He was pushing and shoving us, throwing punches. And then about 15 more settlers came over the hill and started sprinting at us and throwing rocks and stones. At that point, we started to flee. As we were running, they were beating us in the back with sticks and clubs. We jumped back into our vehicle. The army, by the way, was about 20 meters away for all of this, watching. Didn't get out of their vehicle, didn't approach in any way. We got into our vehicle. And at that point, the settlers fully attacked our vehicle. They slashed the tire with a knife. They stoned the body of the car and the windows. The front windshield is completely damaged. 3 of the windows in the back windshield are completely gone, shattered by stones. Eventually, the settlers did leave. The army completely refused to do anything. And at that point in time, we tried to get to the houses and the army blocked our way. So we took another route, and that's when we saw Hamdan and 2 others being arrested.
This is his home village?
Yes, exactly.
Right. And he too had come under attack from the same people that attacked you? Yeah,
so I sort of told you the account of what I experienced. Yes. As I've pieced together the story from other folks who were there, it seems that the settlers went to the homes of Hamdan and Nasser Shrita, who live sort of behind the school, attacked them there. Hamdan sent his family the family had gathered for the iftar evening meal. Hamdan sent his family inside, and then he stepped out to try and send away the settlers. And that was the point at which he was attacked, and he was pretty seriously injured. We went up to his home a few minutes after seeing him get arrested, and there was a pool of his blood on the floor outside of his house, quite substantial. There was an ambulance there, and we received word that there was a little bit of conflicting reports, but either they refused to let him in the ambulance or they actually removed him out of it. In any event, he was denied medical care, blindfolded, zip-tied, along with 2 others. All 3 of them were injured in the attack and put into an army vehicle and taken to the military base.
And I know that the other co-director, the Israeli co-director, Yuval Abraham, has chosen to use the word lynched in describing the treatment of his colleague. And there's 4 co-directors of this film, as you know, but my listeners may not. Another of whom, who witnessed the attack in Susia, described dozens of settlers together with Israeli soldiers threatening us with weapons. The police were there from the beginning and did not intervene. While the soldiers were pointing their weapons at us, the settlers started attacking the houses of the Palestinians. Where is he now? Where are the 3 of them now?
So they were arrested and taken to Susia military
Arrested for
base.
what? Do we know what they were arrested for?
They alleged that they attacked the army is alleging that they attacked the settlers.
I see.
And there was also some claims that they destroyed a settler car, although a lot of the media reports of that were actually pictures of our vehicle completely destroyed. And so it was a picture of our vehicle with the windows completely smashed and the body dented, etc., with the headline that violent Arabs attacked innocent Jewish vehicle, something like this. So obviously just lies. So yeah, they're claiming that they attacked the
and they're still in custody. They're still in custody then, as far as we know.
Yes, that's right.
And do we know what? What their health is? What their health situation is? Do we know whether or not they're receiving medical treatment?
So there was some word that they received a little bit of medical care at the base. They were spotted in the police station about 20 minutes ago by somebody else who was there, who said that they saw blood on Hamdan's sweater, but that he was like sort of alert and conscious and oriented. So, within some reason, he's relatively okay.
I'm obviously seeking comment from the relevant authorities in Israel, and we'll share that with my listeners as and when it arrives. On a more personal note, if I may, Raviv, you're American and an international Jewish activist. Just for the benefit of our understanding, what are you doing there? What is your role on the ground there, if you don't mind me asking?
For sure. So I'm a solidarity activist participating in something called Protective Presence. As you mentioned that these attacks were egregious and unprecedented, and unfortunately, while they are egregious, it is by no means unprecedented.
Yeah, okay.
Attacks like these are happening all the time. On the night of the Oscars itself, there was an attack of very similar scale and magnitude in Susia itself, including the area around Hamdan's actual house. And so our job is to bear witness, document these, stand in solidarity with the Palestinians, share their stories with Western media outlets, and do what we can to support.
And so when the culture minister describes the documentary as a sad moment for the world of cinema, they are describing attempts to build bridges. I mean, it's a Palestinian-Israeli documentary. What is really being objected to is the idea that there are humanitarian goals to pursue here, as opposed to sectarian or individual.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to overstate the importance of the international and Israeli body of activists that are here at any given time. There is 10 and 20 people in the region of Masafer Yatta alone, not to mention other regions in the West Bank doing similar type of work with deep relationships with these families and communities.
And also to bear witness, so that there is eyewitness testimony in moments like this.
Yeah, exactly. So that folks aren't carrying this alone, so that we can share their stories, and for the folks that are surviving this day in and day out to be there and affirm that what is happening is unacceptable, and that we're going to do everything we can to hold that line.
And I suppose at an even more simple level, that to affirm that what is happening is happening. Raviv
Right,
Rose,
exactly.
thank you so much, and stay safe, please. International Jewish activist Raviv, working with the Centre for Jewish Non-Violence. I can tell you, not to add to that account, but the Israeli military has said that it detained 3 Palestinians suspected of hurling rocks at forces and 1 Israeli civilian involved in a, quotes, violent confrontation, end quotes, between Israelis and Palestinians, a claim that witnesses interviewed by the Associated Press have disputed. Neither, as far as I'm aware, have the military provided any eyewitnesses to support their account, whereas everybody else present, as Raviv has just reminded us, has an account of events that is pretty close to unanimous. The military said it had transferred them to Israeli police for questioning and had evacuated an Israeli citizen from the area to receive medical treatment. It's 12:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12. Good Lord, is it really 12:49? Where's the morning gone? Sheila will be with you shortly. Before that, a couple more calls on the very simple question of what would happen if Starmer and Reeve started telling the truth about Brexit, rather than observing some form of self-imposed purdah. The Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Prime Minister, when discussing obstacles to economic growth, actually started talking about the biggest one. The ludicrous decision in 2016 to vote to become the first population in history to impose economic sanctions entirely unprompted and unnecessarily on itself. What would actually happen? And therefore, is it something that they should be doing? I really do recommend to you Polly Toynbee's article in The Guardian today. It's amazing how many people I recommend to you on the programme that have graced the chair of full disclosure over the years. Polly and I conducted a lovely interview, I think last year, which I would also recommend. But in the moment, at this moment in time, it's more the simple observation that you can't keep wanging on about growth while saying nothing about the biggest enemy of growth that this country has ever encountered, one that is incredibly self-imposed. Victor is in Luton. Victor, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello,
thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I think there were 2 aspects to your reservations about reopening the whole Brexit debate. One was to do with whether the EU would have us back, and the other was whether it was something that could be argued domestically. I don't know which one I should I should tackle
you decide.
First.
You decide. It's your show.
I think with Starmer, I think there's a risk that he's sort of throwing out the Brexit bathwater along with the Corbyn baby, because I think back in 2019, not only were a lot more people pro Brexit instead of now,
yes.
Also people didn't believe what Project Fear was saying because the effects of Brexit hadn't materialised. So I think in many cases
the world has turned.
People's Vote campaign, they expended all of their energy prematurely when right around now is when momentum towards rejoining is needed, except all the stuffing has been knocked out of the movement.
Yes.
Because I think they did the right thing at the wrong time.
I think I agree with you. And as I say, I speak as someone who was fairly enthusiastic for a second referendum, but you have to let the impact land before you can start working to undo it.
Yeah, I think also then, given the catastrophe of what Brexit is causing, any party that actually levelled with the public regarding what the effects of Boris's deal on public finances and the economy, what it's doing, they'd be hitting home runs around now. But they're not actually crafting that narrative. And in terms of rejoining the EU, I think actually it might be far easier than we think, because I think actually that the system, the state of affairs has changed since 2019. So we have the issue that there's the younger generation here are more pro-EU, so I don't think Brexit will be repeated.
Sorry for making sort of incoherent noises, but that's where you've led me. I look forward to having this debate when it is actually a feasible option, but at the moment it isn't. Not for the reasons you've described. I'm not disputing what you're saying. It's just we're not there yet. We'll jump off that bridge when we come to it. I'm interested in the first bridge that you're crossing, and that I think you're right. What would Starmer lose now by simply describing the damage that it's done and the importance of trying to row back a bit? I mean, you're talking about the feasibility of rowing back entirely. We don't need to do that yet. What would Starmer lose, given the polling arithmetic and the incontrovertible evidence of catastrophe, whatever, the Daily Mail and Nigel Farage may pretend to the contrary?
He doesn't need to reopen the Brexit debate. He could start with something as milk water as rejoining the customs union or letting young people have freedom of movement. I don't know why that would be considered to be reopening.
I don't know either. And you're absolutely right. They seem frightened even of talking about youth mobility. I mean, we sometimes forget that it takes two to tango, in the same way that it was reported here as if it was a divorce with only one partner. We completely forgot about the trauma and the inconvenience that we inflicted upon the European Union by wanting that divorce, which they didn't particularly want or seek. So similarly, we can talk about youth mobility, but in many ways that would be a gift that the European Union gives to us, and they would want something in return, wouldn't they? So,
I think they offered that, didn't they? And we wouldn't discuss it. And I remember seeing polling that actually they polled citizens of Western Europe, and there's broad support for us rejoining, and even EU leaders like von der Leyen suggested that the next generation undo Brexit. So it looks like EU leaders are for us coming back.
Yeah,
and
I'm sure they would be,
albeit
that Orban might have a power of veto. There'd be problems with regards to the single currency, and we'd probably need some sort of supermajority as well. But none of these are reasons not to have the conversation. And I don't know, what would you say, even if there is? I can't imagine there is any Brexiters still listening, because although you voted for it, you now realise that it was a bit daft of you to do so. And I will never condemn you for that. Contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned is my mantra, has been since the day the result came in. And I told you exactly what would happen over the next 9 years. And here we are, 9 years later, we're right about everything. But the point is, of course, that you don't know what the negatives would be. I mean, what would happen if Starmer and Reeve started saying, oh, look, come on, let's not pretend Brexit wasn't an almighty plumbing great mess, which is still impacting heavily upon our economy. So we talk about a £22 billion black hole, but we don't talk about the biggest shovel. It's incredible. Tim's in air. Tim, what would you like to say?
Tim, good afternoon. Thank you for
I'm James, you're Tim.
Yeah,
I'm James, you're Tim. It's amazing how people... We did a psychological question on Mystery Hour about why that happens. I don't know why. But anyway, sorry, we're running out of time. What do you want to say?
Yes, of course. More concerned about the method by which we might be having these conversations. Does the government need to come back to the people and ask them what they want to do? No law we have set is set forever, and so things can always be changed. And I think we ought to be asking the people 9 years on, 10 years on, what do they think? I can hear your desperation, but the government.
God save us from more referendums. God save us all.
I know, but you've got to get past it somehow. And I don't know, it might be naive of me, but should the government be saying, we have no view, we want you to tell us what you want? Set the referendum up properly with a margin for victory and see what the people say, and then act on what the people say. A properly run referendum, and then go to the EEC, find out what the terms are, and come back and say, do you want it or not?
Yeah.
I don't think Starmer's got anything to lose. I just wish they'd be braver, Labour. They're just not brave enough at the moment.
I don't even know if it involves much bravery. That's really how I framed the question this afternoon. Yeah. Is it, what is it that they're frightened of?
Right-wing press. Oh, absolutely. But they seem to be very wary of it.
Matthew Pennycook's ludicrous intervention earlier today, notwithstanding, they're pretending that somehow it's hard to understand the difference between accepting hospitality that involves security necessary for a Chancellor of the Exchequer or a Prime Minister is the same as accepting free clothes or something like that. The right-wing press are going to attack them, whatever they do.
Of course, and that's why they have to do it, for the good of the country. And I think if we ask the people what they want and set the referendum out in very clear, succinct terms, not the bodge job that we had before.
Not having it. No, don't cut him off. I didn't mean that. I just meant I'm having
That's all right. We part as friends, even if you disagree with me.
We always part as friends. I just can't bear it, Tim. It's all right for you up in air. You wouldn't have to do it every day, would you? You'd just be able to turn up and vote. You wouldn't have to spend 2 months in the run-up dealing with all manner of half-wits and angry men shouting at you about things that aren't simply true, that simply aren't true. I want to play you a little clip, actually, of Basil Adra and Yuval Abraham, two of the directors of that film, which the Israeli culture minister described in such negative terms and which seeks to build bridges between those two communities. This was them picking up an award at last year's Berlinale film award ceremony.
Good evening, everybody. We're glad to be here and grateful. It's our first movie since many years. My community, my family has been filming our community being erased by this brutal occupation. I'm here celebrating the award, but also very hard for me to celebrate when there are tens of thousands of my people being slaughtered and massacred by Israel in Gaza. Masafir Yatta, my community, is being also erased by Israeli bulldozers. I ask one thing for Germany, as I am in Berlin here, to respect the UN calls and stop sending weapons to Israel.
I want to say we are standing in front of you now. Me and Basil are the same age. I am Israeli, Basil is Palestinian. And in 2 days, we will go back to a land where we are not equal. I'm living under a civilian law, and Basil is under military law. We live 30 minutes from one another, but I have voting rights, and Basil is not having voting rights. I'm free to move where I want in this land. Basil is, like millions of Palestinians, locked in the occupied West Bank. This situation of apartheid between us, this inequality, it has to end. We ask how we can make a change to end the occupation, to move for a political solution. And we don't really have the answer, but I think one answer is for people to really stand up. There is a lot of powerful people in this room. There is a lot of ministers and people whose voices are heard. We need to call for a ceasefire. We need to call for a political solution to end the occupation.
And one of their co-directors, of course, currently in custody in Israel after being attacked by Israeli settlers and subsequently, this is the victim of the attack, subsequently arrested. And that film, which saw 2 Israelis and 2 Palestinians seek to build bridges between their communities, was described by Israel's culture minister when it won the Oscar as a sad moment for the world of cinema. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily. It's like Arthur's little cousin. The best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
Thank you. James O'Brien on LBC.